guys? You are listening to the HatzChat podcast where HatzMania will be discussing different Yu-Gi-Oh topics every week. And this week, I wanted to talk about whether or not we're heading into a Tier 2 format. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, Tier 2 decks, obviously, are decks that are not, inherently competitive. They can win every once in a while against a Tier 1. And they're rather consistent, but they're not really that great. They're a little bit slower. And I feel like this same mentality would apply to a deck really dominated by Tier 2 decks, and I'm putting my fingers in quotations if you can't see that, which you probably shouldn't. The pace of the game is much, much slower, especially slower, even slower, I think, than, 2015, 2014 format. Probably closer to about where, 2013, 2012 format was, and, not Tier 0 stuff, but Tier 1 decks were at those points in time, at that point in time, that's where Tier 2 would probably be about now. There aren't any decks that are clearly defined over the other. So you have a bunch of decks, 10 different decks that are clearly all equal in power, so therefore it really doesn't matter, and therefore only the cheapest decks will probably win all the time. Decks are formatted very similar to the decks of past formats rather than involving newer playstyles. We're coming up with a bunch of new decks, and we haven't really seen a lot that's inherently different than what we've seen before. I mean, Cosmos were pretty cool, mainly for their theme. They have the banishing thing where they can banish themselves from field or graveyard and then getting out another Cosmo card immediately, and that's really what makes it faster. And then Performance Pals can pretty much mesh with anything and still be rather relevant. And then you have Monarchs, and Monarchs are just searching everything to hell and drawing power. So it's essentially Monarchs 2.0, and they're different from what they were before, or are different from what has been going on recently. So whereas a Tier 2 deck format, nothing has changed in terms of how decks run whatsoever in terms of incorporating new decks into the format. Why do I think there's a current concern for this? Well, the OCG ban list has substantially hit everything relevant. Monarchs lost Pantheism Domain, and the FTK lost Life Equalizer, Pain Equalizer, whatever the hell the card was called. I don't really care because I hate the deck. And it will definitely get hit over here. I mean, if Royal Magical Library doesn't get hit, then Pain, whatever the trap card is called, definitely will, regardless. So it's just the deck is gonna get killed. Burning Abyss really recently went over to the OCG, and they got killed immediately, by their most recent ban list. Dante and Scarm got hit to 1, and they're both at 3 still here, and the deck is still alive because of it, and they're vitally important to the deck doing well. So the fact that the deck is still alive, and those 2 cards are at 3 here, but not in the OCG, and they've had the deck for a lot less time than us, that means that BA is going to get killed, I think, at least. And it's probably one of the top 5 decks, maybe 4th place if you think about it, in terms of how consistent, how well it does. So, yeah. And then Performance Pals were finally killed off, or at the very least the Draco-pal's version of the deck. Luster's staying at 1 for sure. Ignister went to 1, which was kind of a shock for people, but in a little bit. It was surprising. Not necessarily a shock, but it was surprising that he went to 1. Mainly because Draco Face-Off, I feel was a much bigger problem. And in my personal opinion, at least, and that did get hit to 1. But in all respect, I feel that might have been a little much. But regardless, and also Reasoning went to 1 again in the OCG, and that hasn't been at 1 for I think 2 years or something over here. And it went to 1 again in the OCG, and it's being used in Cosmo and Infernoids over here. But Reasoning hasn't seen a ton of use over in the OCG. So the fact that as much as I would say over here in the TCG anyway, and the fact that it's still being used by 2 of the top most powerful decks, and one of which is TCG exclusive, and the other one has been relevant for quite a bit. I mean, Infernoids are still rather consistent. I definitely think Reasoning will go to 1 as well, knocking Infernoids out of the meta probably once and for all. Cosmo players are anticipating a ban list as well sometime before Shining Victories is released. It's probably inevitable. Yes, we're getting more Cosmo support in Shining Victories, but I feel that's what's really going to save the deck in terms of its competitiveness. And a lot of people are calling for E-Telly to get at least limited. I've already gone into a lot of detail about this card regardless. And if you don't know Cosmos, you should know that E-Telly is a key combo card in the deck. I mean, if you have a Farm Girl and E-Telly, you're probably going to win the game. That's just how the deck works. It's their OTK. They're kind of like their win condition in a way. Even though like the deck can still function, still beat the living crap out of you, despite not having one or two of those cards in their opening hand. Just because the deck is just stupidly consistent. Another signal here is that the Cosmos were just reprinted last week in Gold Rare, and this is signaling to a lot of players that Cosmos is going to hit this deck. Typically, if you don't know how Commoney works, basically they really like to bleed people dry of certain decks, specifically or cards, specifically when they're doing really well, when they're really important to a lot of decks, and then ban them immediately, such as one card that's a good example of this is Laval Chain. It was getting reprinted to hell last year, and then it got banned pretty much after the third or fourth time it was finally reprinted. So in which its final time was in a gold rare set. So like the fact that they do this a lot is like, I would not be surprised if Cosmo got hit in some way in the next set. In the next ban list. And there also hasn't been a major, good, or consistent archetype revealed to us yet from Shining Victories. The archetypes getting decent support that we know of from Shining Victories are Blue Eyes, Toons, Raid Raptor, Dynamist, Amorphage, Cosmo, Lunalight, and Speedroid. And that's a decent amount, but I would only say 4 of those being Raid Raptor, Dynamist, Amorphage, and Cosmo, will be even relevant or close to being relevant. Dynamist, you could argue, isn't like the most consistent deck in the world, but it does have decent protection, and once they have an established field, it's very hard to break them. And they also have decent searching and decent special summoning straight from the deck, albeit it's a little slow than most of other decks, but it's still rather good. Raid Raptor has been getting more and more consistent and more powerful support than they've had in the past. I mean, Wing Raiders was very kind to Raid Raptors. So would not be surprised if Raid Raptors shot up in terms of, Rory Raptors anyway, have really shot up in terms of popularity. And then like Lunalight has been also getting some popularity, but I don't really see that deck being any more than a tier 2 deck at most. And Speedroid is just there. It's just there. And then if you don't know about Inform Mages, it's a Dragon Earth Pendulum deck that's actually pretty decently consistent. It gets out probably one of the best ritual monsters in the game. It basically, when the card is ritual summon, your opponent skips their next main phase 1 or something like that, which is absolutely a ridiculous effect. And all they need is a field spell, which is stupid. But Amorphages, I feel like they're going to be annoying. They're going to be like borderline like not fun to play. Like people are going to hate to play against that deck just because they're just overall just annoying. And then Dark Illusion, which is the set after Shining Victories, which is set to debut, I think, early August or late July, something like that. It's going to be our summer set, but there's not enough to known about the deck to really get a handle about the set, in order for us to get a real handle about what we're getting. I mean, yeah, we're getting Metalphosis, which is like basically new Ignites, but it's still not great. The fact that it's a vanilla monster deck is not foreboding well. They do have decent spell and trap support, and their fusion spell is pretty decent as well. It's consistent draw power as long as it's in the graveyard. But the big problem with the deck is that it's full of normal monsters, and their fusions are no exception. They have one that's just a big 3,300 beater, which isn't terrible, but it's not great either. And then their other fusion does double piercing, but people aren't playing flip effect monsters much anymore, so I'm not really seeing that coming up too often. And unlike last format, what could be considered tier 2 in the summer of 2015 has all disappeared in the face of the 2016 metagame. I mean, the 3 decks that are the top 3 at the moment are just stupidly consistent, and like they're just overpowering everything else. I mean, even Atlantean Mermails and Phantom Knights are barely hanging in there as the like top 5 in terms of how consistent and like how well they're doing. And they're just like holding on. They're hoping for this ban list, because if this ban list happens, I feel like Phantom Knights and Mermails will probably be the best decks in the format, especially if the other 3 decks get very hit, like just out of the game. But going back to the tier 2 decks that could possibly, like, these decks should definitely come back in terms of relevancy and how well they're going to be doing. Volcanics have dropped off the face of the earth since last year, since they got their new support, and the support's pretty good. The fact that it's a recyclable Raigeki that does damage and a consistent Raigeki at that is pretty decent. It just lacks a lot of power play. And then Yang Zings aren't nearly as popular as they once before. Sorry to all you Master Race fans, but Yang Zings are not nearly as powerful as they once were. However, if the top 3 get hit, you could probably see some Yang Zings come out of the woodwork here and see them do some damage in the meta. Infernoids, while still somewhat relevant, haven't done much since YCS Dallas this year. However, I touched upon the fact that Reasoning got hit to 1, so most likely Infernoids will not do well coming. And then same with the Ritual Beast, they got one-shotted by the ban list, and I don't think Konami's going to let them resurface for some time either. And Yusenjus have seen little to no play, but they have been doing some damage over in the OCG, but I think it's more because of the fact that their meta is different. They use a lot more back row than we do, more summoning destruction than we do, specifically things like Torrential Tribute or and like Bottomless Trap Hole. They like those are more consistently better traps for them because they use it more often. And that being said, they also have cards like Harpy's Feather Duster and Heavy Storm to back that up and allowing them to destroy as much back row as possible. So like those decks could come back if we see a lot of hits. But at the same time, I don't really know if that's going to happen. There are even some of the bigger decks right now that are having trouble competing with the top 3 decks. I mentioned these in passing before, but Phantom Knights are relevant. But they haven't been doing like super well since Jeff Jones' version won the UDS. And you could even argue that's not even a big win for them either because the UDS isn't that big of a tournament as compared to like a regional or a national tournament or qualifier. UDS isn't that as big. And Atlantean Mermails are up there, definitely. I like... Mermails are still sticking up there, but the one problem I see with the deck is their win condition. And a lot of people are like, oh, and you're probably, like, your biggest response here is probably like, what's wrong with their win condition? Well, it's very clear what their win condition is. They're going to go for that win condition, which is using Neptibus to OTK you as hard and as quickly as possible. And if you stop Neptibus or you stop Instant Fusion, which is if they have a Neptibus and an Instant Fusion, that's an instant OTK. But if you stop either one of those cards, if you're able to do it, they can't win that turn, and therefore you have a turn for retaliation. And because of that, there are ways to stop it. I mean, there are decks that have an instant auto win to the deck, and the first one that comes to mind for some reason is Psyframes. If they pull a Gamma on the Atlantean Mermails, specifically on Neptibus, or if they pull Delta on a Instant Fusion, the deck is going to fall apart. So it's just... And the fact that they get 2 monsters out that can be like a barricade against the deck is... Yeah, it's not going to go over well against Atlantean. So, like, I don't know why that came to mind. It's just a random example. But, like, just to back up my point here. But the fact that Atlantean Mermails are, in fact, like, they have a clear win condition and it's stoppable. So... yeah, that's all I've got to say about this topic. If you guys have more to discuss about this, please comment below. And as always, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And, of course, have a nice day.